Hey everybody, welcome to Surface Level, a show that takes a look at society's expectations and rejects the ones we don't see it for. All from the perspective of three Black queer best friends. I'm one of your hosts, Jordan, and today, Damon, Tony, and I are discussing homophobia in the Black church. How has our relationship with the Black church impacted our views on religion? How can the Black church become a safe space for queer people? This is Adam and Steve. Adam and Steve. All right, you guys. So we are going to talk about a topic that I don't have a ton of firsthand experience with. But Damon has a lot of experience with, and I think Tony's in the same boat as me.
I'm out here with these sinners.
Listen, I'm gonna tread very lightly on this episode. Keep it all the way cute for the congregation.
And that you will do, and I will try as well. So, we're going to do some games first, okay? Some church-related games. So that was very difficult to think about over the over the past couple days. Oh my God. But I think that I got some fun games for us to play.
All right, well, take us to Bible study.
So, imagine this: you're new to a church, and they ask for all the new people to come to the altar. Are you going up to the altar not knowing what's going to happen next, or staying in your seat?
When they be doing that at churches, everybody knew stand up. No, I don't want a spotlight on me. I don't want people to know it's my first time here. I'm not trying to come down in front of the altar. I just want to get the word and go on about my business. So no, I'm not. Sometimes you're in a position where you're made to do it, especially if you're with someone that brought you there. They're looking at you like, so you gotta kind of stand up.
I know. I looked my mama right in the face. She was like, "Stand up, you visiting?" I was like, "No, I'm not, Mom."
So neither one of y'all are going up?
No. Are you going up?
I know what's happening at the altar, so I ain't going down there.
You know I ain't going up.
Going down.
I'm like, I need to figure out what's going on. Maybe I'll stand up the next time. I'm like, what y'all about to
be
do?
Down there at the altar,
laid out prostrate in front of the altar.
All right. So you've decided that you're at the age where you want to invest in having church candy on hand.
Oh.
Are you bringing butterscotch buttons or peppermint swirls?
Never butterscotch.
Butterscotch, yes.
Never, ever,
no
ever.
Butterscotch?
I'm bringing the butterscotch.
Ew.
I hate those peppermint things that dissolve.
Black lady.
Those peppermint things dissolve into like a river in your mouth.
I'd rather have a mint than that nasty butterscotch.
I'm about to go buy some butterscotch after this.
Yuck.
I'm going to keep some in my house.
Well, you know what? I'm not going to yuck your yum on today.
Yes, yuck your yum. I haven't heard that one.
Tony,
you always got a new one every day, don't you?
I'm not going to yuck his yum. Not on today. It's the Lord's Day on the podcast.
All right now. Okay. What gospel song would you rather hear in the club? God and Me by Mary Mary, or Say Yes, Michelle Williams featuring Beyonce and Kelly?
I would say Yes, because I get to hear Beyonce and Kelly on there, and Michelle's just like, she's that girl, but she get up and sing a church song now, and that particular song is that's a club box. Yes. They put the beat on it, like that's definitely a club box. The girls be twerking and whatnot. Yeah, I could do that.
So it used to be God and Me because Howard University, for the old heads, when we used to go to Pure for $1 drinks on Fridays, they used to always play that.
They used to play Pure at the $1 drinks?
Yes. And
y'all was wasted in that place.
Y'all.
I wasn't. I didn't.
Oh.
I was younger in college, so I wasn't 21 really in Howard.
Mm-hmm. She didn't drink.
Youthful.
Uh-huh. But now I would say yes, just because Mary Mary says is a homophobic evil person now. So
see how it all comes back out.
Just ruin everything for me.
You know what? I can't. Let's move on. I'm getting upset.
Well, I was gonna say God and Me. You know when they do. Once it gets home, that's the part where you get a little bit lower.
When the beat be going in. But listen,
they got the auto-tune going.
I'm going to have to separate the art from the artist.
I think it's just one of them. So maybe you just skip the second verse or something when you listen to it.
Just listen to Mary.
Not the other Mary. Listen to Erica, not Tina. I believe their
name's not Mary Mary?
No, their names are not Mary Mary.
Oh, no, that's right. They better have stage names. All right. Okay. You're sitting in church, and the stranger next to you is singing super loud but doesn't seem to know the words to the song well enough?
Oh, God.
Are you, there's only two options,
See,
clapping louder to drown out their voice, or singing the correct words louder to lead by example?
I'm gonna sing out. You gotta lead the people. That's why I'm here with y'all. I'm trying to lead y'all to salvation.
You know what? I'm a show out and clap loud.
Because you don't know the words.
Because I don't know the words, but I know those ain't the words.
Right. Meanwhile, we singing a hymn though. It's a book in front of you with the words in it.
If they're singing Amazing Grace, I can sing louder, but anything else, I gotta clap.
Which verse of Amazing Grace?
Which one is
you
on
know there's more than one.
Well, which one is on the writings on the wall? I can do that one, but only the one with Beyonce runs. Yes. How sweet
Her sound.
Yes. I'm happy we're all on the same page. Okay, last question. And this is where there's a lot of pressure, okay? You were asked to contribute a dish to be served after church service. What are you bringing?
The dish to be served after. Well, I mean, I love a fish plate, so I ain't gonna cook it. I'm gonna have Meemaw make it.
You gotta cook it.
Oh, I gotta cook it. Well,
Yeah.
then
We have a taco.
Not tacos.
That's what Tony
All
makes.
right, y'all, it's Taco Sunday.
yes,
I'm gonna make greens.
You gonna make greens?
I make good greens.
I like those greens. I like
That's
those greens.
that's high stakes.
Greens. No,
You've had my greens many a year.
I know, but everybody got
Listen, well, if you don't like my greens, you better go home and make your own.
Well, my aunt who makes macaroni and cheese for the entire family, we all love her mac and cheese. She brought mac and cheese to a funeral one time, and she heard somebody saying, "Who brought this mac and cheese? What is this?" And she was so upset the whole day. I was just like, everybody don't like everybody mac and cheese, and I think it's the same for greens. It is for me.
What you gonna bring?
Meh.
Oh, I'm bringing rice and beans.
Ew.
When did you start making rice and beans?
I don't, but I figure it's easy enough.
Rice and
nobody.
beans.
Well, you don't really care. You just throw it on the side. You just let it sop up the sauce. You don't really care about rice and beans.
Which beans?
It's like, why is this here?
I don't know.
Like you put a quick can of black beans and white rice. I'm trying to figure out
Why does it have to be white rice? No, it's
Listen,
it's
we've already spent too much time talking about these rice and beans.
because I know you're not making like a lime cilantro rice, so I'm trying to figure out.
I've made one of those before.
Lie
It was
again.
very delicious, actually. I don't know what I'm bringing. Cups,
You bringing cups and Tony's bringing napkins.
plasticware,
Yes. bring money for the offering.
money for the delivery.
Money for your fish plate.
Yeah.
Well, today we're gonna. It's funny. Delve into a topic around that is a hot button within our community because I think a lot of people have had some positive and a lot of really negative experiences with it. So we'll have a guest later to talk a bit more in depth about it, but we're going to start with kind of our personal experiences. So let's start here. At the age we are now, living in New York, are you a religious or a spiritual person? And how has that changed over as growing up from your childhood? Jordan, let's start with you because you look very prepared. You look like tag me in, coach.
Never been religious. No plans on starting to be religious. Religion has just never been like a part of my upbringing.
Can't spell religion.
Well, first of all, I can spell everything. Okay,
Everything.
I'm a wordsmith, as Phaedra Parks would say.
Okay, well, get your words together for this response.
No, I identify more with spirituality if it's one or the other. I do believe that there's a reason that all of this is here. When I say this, I mean like people, humans, stars, galaxies, things like that. Like I do believe that there's like a reason why it's here. I just don't know what the answer is, and I don't think I'm really interested in a religion telling me what the answer is. And I think my childhood is the same. I grew up with my mother's side of the family, and we weren't religious at all. I mean, we've never went to church, or I can't remember us ever going to church outside of a funeral or a wedding. I don't remember us ever talking about religion in a meaningful way. And I think that we only prayed for like Thanksgiving dinner, which was always weird because no one was religious. So it was like,
Don't nobody know how to pray.
All right, Jordan, you pray. Me?
Thank you for greens, Jesus.
That's exactly how it went when I used to do it. And it used to be 3 seconds long. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't religious, and I'm not religious today.
Tony.
I would say so. But as it pertains to me right now, present day, being religious versus a spiritual person, I would say not much of either. But if I had to choose one, I think I lean more on the spiritual side. And I wanted to kind of level set here because this is a conversation that really I think only Damon is the most versed. And I was like, well, what's the difference between religion and spirituality? So I found a couple definitions that I just want to read because I wanted to help sort of continue to shape the conversation. So religion
I need this.
says
What
that
is it?
this is a specific set of organized beliefs and practices, usually shared by a community or group. Makes sense. Spirituality this is more of an individual practice and has to do with having a sense of peace and purpose. It also relates to the process of developing beliefs around the meaning of life and connection with others without any set of spiritual values. So when I think about that, I'm like, peace and purpose. Like, I lean more on that spiritual side of like, there's a guiding light. I do believe in God. I do believe in a higher power. But if I had to choose based on these definitions, like spirituality is probably like more, in line with me. And as it, like Jordan hinted on or touched on his childhood as it relates to church, and I kind of like him. I actually, when I was a kid, I was brought to church a little bit more. My grandmother on my mother's side of the family is a big church person, and we used to go as kids. But through the generations, my mother didn't really make me go, and because of that, church became just more distant and more faint, and so that has probably a lot to do with present day why I'm not so religious.
Through the generations. She's actually 800 years old.
Through the generations. Coming from my grandmother through my mother.
It sounded like you were saying as you lived through the generations.
And then down to me and my brother, like the generations, like it's just got more and more distant from the church.
Damon, why are you more religious?
I don't think I am more religious.
Oh.
See, there you go.
Assuming.
You said you was going to be quiet over there. Hush. But no, so background, yes, I grew up in the church. My grandfather was like pastor of a storefront church in Chicago. He originally had the church in the basement of the house in Chicago. Yeah.
That's convenient.
My dad eventually became the head of the deacons board at our churches growing up, and at his church he was at more recently. My mom's obviously preacher's kid and grew up in that way. I was directing choir growing up, of course, queer boy directing the choir.
Yes.
I was in this group called the Spiritual Brothers with these other guys that sang.
Did y'all have spirit hands?
No, we didn't have spirit hands. We just had the spirit, and we were going out to the highways and the byways to save souls, because that's what Jesus said to do. So that's why I've been friends with y'all for 10 years.
Oh my God.
Y'all on the side of the road. I'm trying to lead you back.
I know, Tony. Get back on the right track.
I'm still waiting on you to save my soul.
Y'all can drag me straight into the fiery pits with you, probably. But I think as an adult, like really out of some traumatic experiences I've had with specific to the church, I have, yes, focused more on my individual connection to what I believe I should be doing in the universe, how I interact with energy of different people, of different organizations, and so on. So I too would say that I am more of a spiritual person, even with the background and the upbringing that I've had. Mm-hmm. So yeah. And then it seems like basically everybody's not involved in church now. So what kind of led to those experiences? Maybe, Jordan, we can go back to you because I think you have some very specific experiences.
So, I mean, like I said, my mom's side of the family wasn't really churchgoers, but I did spend summers in Michigan with my father's side of the family, and that's really where my aversion to religion started. I just vividly remember being told that being gay was an abomination. I mean, I probably share the same experience as a lot of queer people. But, at a very early age, that impacted me in a way where I felt like I was conditioning myself, or like I was being conditioned to hate myself. And I really, like, once I got old, like when I was getting older, I really started to resent that, that rhetoric, because it didn't stop. It was always being said. I don't know why. Maybe they sensed that I could be gay, and it was like, well, let me just say it around him, see if it catches his ears. It did, and I remember vividly being forced to go to the temple every Saturday with my dad's side of the family, and I hated it. Like I vividly remember like trying to pretending like I was asleep and trying to like not go. It never worked, and yeah, I just felt like that's when I started to not really, you know, become a fan of church. And then I went to Catholic high school, and it was there where I just felt like I was being forced to adopt a way of thinking that very early on turned me off. So I feel like even like as I got older, I just got to a place where I just wasn't even open to hearing conversations about religion. Like as soon as I felt like someone was trying to talk to me about religion, an automatic wall went up. Yeah, and it started from a very young age.
Yeah, I think I had very. This is an interesting story. So in maybe high school years, when you start getting a little older, and I guess at that point everybody realized that hey, he's a little queer. And I remember one of my good friends. Her name's Goldie. We're still good friends today, and we were in church, and this woman was just told her and her mom like, you should stop having like Goldie hang out with Damon. She was like, he's leading her down the wrong path. Ooh. And all these things about me. And I remember it came back to me.
You were leading the girl down the wrong path.
Or just exposing her to the person that they were seeing me to be. Was not something that a good spiritual person should even be around, I guess.
Got it. Don't want to catch the gay.
Right. And then I just remember there were all these instances where I started to feel neglected from that church. My parents ended up leaving, and they ended up joining another church that was a bit more queer affirming. But I just remember it left such a horrible taste in my mouth. Like there was a very long time where I did not want to be involved specifically with organized religion. Fast forward to maybe a few months ago, ironically, we were doing the podcast, and obviously we do have a big social presence. That's where we promote a lot. And the son of that same woman reached out to me and was just like, I am so happy seeing you live your life out loud in the way that you are. And I've listened to the podcast, and it's helped me get through some things because, to be honest, I, at points in my life, have felt attraction to men. And after all these years, I've still never acted on it because I've been so afraid to. And seeing you lead an example where you're living in a way that you feel affirmed has been really inspiring. And I just remember sitting there thinking, it's crazy how people get so wrapped up in dogma and preaching about a thing that's not even true, that you think you're just hurting me and like somebody else's son. Meanwhile, you're inflicting harm on the people closest and most directly connected to you.
Right. God is a comedian. Where are we going with funny this? Way of literally bringing things to a full circle. And in those moments, it like, I don't think people think about their children when they're, having such criticisms about other people's children. And we're all supposed to be children of God, right? Children of Christ. And I think everyone jumps to criticizing. Yeah. Which is, it just is so hypocritical to me. But personally, I'm not involved with church as much because as a kid, I didn't think church was that interesting. I didn't think it was fun. Like that's a kid's mindset. It's like, why am I being made to go to this church and sit down with these old people and sing these songs and do, then there's food. Like, I was just like, what is this and why? Didn't really
on the weekend at that.
Didn't and on a Sunday, like, no. And then I didn't have anyone really explain to me what it is I was doing. It was just kind of like you had to do it, so it felt like a chore as opposed to something higher. So it was very much giving, I'm bored and I don't want to be involved, and so I just never got back into it. But I do think that, and I've had these thoughts in recent years where I feel like faith, religion, or spirituality, or some combination thereof, is something that is missing in my daily life that I would like to explore, but I just haven't taken the steps to do so.
So do you think there's value still in organized religion?
Okay, so I I have a specific answer about this question because I think there are pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the pros that I have decided upon is that as it relates to organized religion is that, you know, a church and I'm going to use the church as an example, but and talk about it in that way. But I think that a church they take care of their members. There's positive things that come into the community. I love the sense of community and belonging. It can positively impact people's well-being, which I think there's a healing involved there that is life-changing, and you grow up with a set of morals. All of these things are positive. But then on the con side, I think the institution can be extremely harsh in terms of judging other groups or individuals within the church community, since I'm using that as an example. And it can feel exclusionary. And I'm like, isn't that the point, to not be exclusionary? Isn't it supposed to be welcoming? And there's a history and a precedence of violence and oppression that there is towards other religions and non-followers. And I think some of the religions also engage in intense brainwashing that we all know about, and conversion therapy, like stuff like that goes on. And lastly, with cons, I think that there's sometimes when there's a charismatic leader, people look at them as like their God, their Jesus Christ themselves in the flesh. And that's a lot of power to give an individual. But a lot of people follow that, and that does tend to happen sometimes, which is very, very dangerous. So, you know, it's half of one, six of one, half a dozen of the other.
There we go. What's going to be the next one?
Speaking of Negro spirituals again.
That's what it is.
Jordan.
Woo! Yes, I definitely see the value in it. I mean, I just talked about how my father's side of the family, you know, I talked about the negative part, but baby, they need religion. And I think that a lot of people do benefit a lot from having faith and having organized religion. I think specifically when I talk about like my dad's side of the family, I feel like I can tell that they take a lot of the good from it, and that it helps them stay focused on their goals and stay out of trouble. I think that, you know, there is a lot of good teachings in organized religion. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of value in it. I think that some people, I might even argue, need some religion. I just don't think I'm one of them.
I think yes, but from a more tangible place, I would say. I think that the Black church specifically has been a really big part of the history of the rights that many of us enjoy, from the history of civil rights leaders and early leaders within our community coming from the church, MLK, Adam Clayton Powell, etc. I think the influence of the church in popular music, Black music, rock and roll, all these things, I think that you wouldn't have a lot of the sounds you love without the Black church.
Yeah,
I think
Tyler Perry movies.
Sure. Yes.
Did you say Aretha Franklin?
Hello? Whose father was a pastor. The Howard Normal Theological Institute for the Education of Preachers and Teachers, later Howard University, the place where we have so much of our experience and who we are. I think looking at President Obama, how he speaks, how he talks, like the way in which he orates is tied so closely to the Black church. Some of the biggest moments of his entire presidency, speaking at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston after that massacre of the church members, the history of that church and those speeches, being there in that moment, singing Amazing Grace, is something that you can't ignore. I think that even if you want to make it super tangible, y'all just got your little stimulus checks. Mainly because Reverend Raphael Warnock was able to become the first Black senator from a former Confederate state. And he was able to carry that state due to the support. And he's the pastor of the church that MLK used to preach at. And he was able to carry himself and that mediocre white man over the finish line in Georgia because of the support of Black people, often tied to the church, souls to the polls, etc. So I think that, yes, there are tons of things that I have had negative experiences with as far as the church and organization of it. But I do think that I would be remiss to not highlight the history and the impact that it has had even on our lives today.
Yeah. And quickly, one other thing that I did want to bring up as it relates to this conversation, because it's so relevant with what's going on right now, is that when you think about church, you think about acceptance. And I think acceptance is a big reason why a lot of people in the queer community aren't involved in church. And recently, we all know about what happened or what's going on from Donnie McClurkin and him saying that he doesn't think he'll ever be able to like love because he too in the past or even present day, we don't know, has had relationships with both men and women. And he thinks because he'll be condemned or shamed or kicked out or what have you, that he's not, it hasn't allowed him to be his full self. And that to me, like those are the things in the stories that make, it very
hard to support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So today we have a very special guest with us. We're really excited to have this conversation. So I'm going to give him a quick introduction. We have Michael A. Walrond Jr., who is the senior pastor of First Corinthian Baptist Church, also known as FCBC in Harlem, New York. Affectionately known as Pastor Mike, he quickly has risen as one of the most prolific and sought-after teachers and preachers in the country. Considered a visionary, cultural architect, and game changer by his peers, Pastor Mike has not only catalytically changed the traditional perspective of the Black church, but he is also shifting the paradigm of Christian understanding and culture. So today, we welcome Pastor Mike to our surface level family.
Welcome.
Yes. So excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here with you all today.
Yeah, thank you for your time. So before we jump into the Q&A, what we typically like to do is just play a little game of this or that, just to learn a little bit more about you, and so our listeners can get to know about you, the person, before we get into this topic. So I'm going to start with a few questions. So we know that you are a Q. So shout out to all the brothers of Omega Psi Phi fraternity. What experience do you cherish more? The pledge experience or being an active brother on campus?
Probably being active. I mean, the pledge experience is unique unto itself.
Yeah.
But beyond the experience, being able to engage in service and leadership, not just in school, but beyond that, we never stop engaging in that work and honoring our cardinal principles. So I would say pledging is the shortest part of being part of the fraternity. I think it is how you live through the principles of manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and uplift that really shape the bulk of our life as part of the fraternity.
Yes, a lifelong commitment.
Absolutely.
All right. So would you rather cook every meal or order delivery for every meal?
I would rather cook. The question is, do I have time?
That is always the struggle.
But between my wife and I, we do a great deal of cooking. We have tried to relegate ordering out to the weekends. So we both contribute to the cooking in the house.
Got you. So much discipline. I feel like I order out a lot more than I need to.
I've had your cooking. Keep ordering out.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm working on it. My chicken thigh is coming together nicely.
Always have that one go-to meal.
You gotta have it.
Exactly. Would you rather be held in high regard by your parents or by your friends?
I would say parents. And I'll say this because you can find various friends, but you have one set of parents. And I'd rather have the regard and respect and the love of my parents. I've learned in this life that friends are few. And going back to my fraternity, our motto is friendship is essential to the soul. And so there are people you'll meet over your lifetime that will come and go, but your parents will be who they are for all of your life, whether they're alive or not. I'd rather have the respect and love and honor of my parents than anybody else.
Nice.
Love that.
So in terms of vacations, do you prefer beach or a city?
Beach, definitely. I'm a Caribbean boy. I'm Bajan, man.
Yes.
And I mean, we all need a break from the city sometimes, right?
I'm over the city.
Same. Would you rather lose all of your memories from the past or lose your ability to make new memories in the future?
I
I know. I didn't tell you these are going to be tough.
I would rather lose memories from the past.
Ooh.
Because, and you said, or lose the capacity to make new memories?
Correct.
Yeah, because I'd rather lose memories from the past, because if I lose the capacity to make new memories, it means I've lost the capacity to have experiences.
Mhm.
And so I would rather be able to have new experiences to create new memories than hold on to the past, because sometimes the danger in memory is that we don't always know how to compartmentalize what has been damaging, what has been fruitful in our memory.
Mhm.
And so that's why we sometimes get so consumed with what has gone wrong versus what has gone right. So I'd rather be able to let go of the past memories and still have the capacity to create new memories via new experiences.
Onward. That's the motto.
Right.
Let's see. If you could only listen to one group for the rest of your life, would it be the Isley
Mm,
Brothers or Earth, Wind, and Fire?
Isley Brothers.
That was quick.
Yeah, he was watching the Easter Sunday verses.
Yeah. I mean, I like both, but Isley Brothers, man, that's what I want to listen to.
And as a tradition, we ask all of our guests how they prefer to receive love from the following list of love languages. Is it words of affirmation, physical touch, receiving gifts, quality time, or acts of service?
I get to pick one?
Yep, only one.
Love. I would say words of affirmation, because
I can see that.
words give life.
Hmm.
And yeah, you could say I want gifts, and I don't need gifts. Gifts are material; those are inanimate things. Service, that's the one I probably would have put neck and neck. But words have transformative and transcendent power. That's what I do. I preach, and so I know the power of words to transform, to heal, to save, to give love, to give comfort. So I would rather have words than anything.
Yes. And my final question, which is a very broad question. What are you curious about?
Right now, I am probably more curious, and a lot of the scientific articles that are coming out that are helping us see that the universe may not be what we've thought it to be for the last few centuries. That there's more to the universe in terms of how we understand black holes, until how we understand matter. That is more interesting to me, because so much of what happens around us and even within us, we don't factor that we're part of something that is larger than us. This universe is amazing. And sometimes we're so narcissistic in our humanity that we don't realize that we're part of a larger project that's taking place. And to understand more about that larger project, the universe, it really intrigues me right now.
Beautiful.
Love that. Well, Pastor Mike, you just spoke about words of affirmation. And so I want to start this off with a few words that you had a big hand in creating for 1 Corinthians. And that's your mission statement. So it reads, and I quote, "We are an ever-evolving community of visionaries, dreamers, and doers who have been called by God to live the lives we were created to live, commanded by God to love beyond the limits of our prejudices, and commissioned by God to serve." So we want to start by asking you specifically, why was commanded by God to love beyond the limits of our prejudices important to include in that mission statement for you?
Well, let me tell you something that is some people at least should know this story of that statement. I was at my desk in 2009. Literally, I just finished reading a book called Wide Awake by Erwin McManus. I picked up a pencil and I wrote that entire statement in 3 minutes, one shot.
Wow.
It just came in the moment. The only thing I've changed over the years is we added doers, but it came. And I think that the commanded to love beyond our prejudices, and I know it is critical, because within Christianity, within the church in general, within human interaction in general as well, we have a tendency to allow our views to be shaped by our biases and our prejudices. And those of us who claim to be Christian, I say this, and if you've heard me before in any way, I make a distinction between what it means to be a Christian and what it means to be a follower of the carpenter. I say that because the institution is extremely tainted and is extremely toxic in many ways. But the teachings of that poor Galilean peasant carpenter, you cannot be confused by his teachings.
Mm-hmm.
And at the forefront of the teachings of the carpenter, the underlying ethos of the teachings is love. It is rooted, steeped in the love ethos. And so if we are called to love and commanded by God to love, that love has to transcend the biases, the prejudices that way they may seek to shape our worldview and our view of other people. So that means that even our prejudices and our biases and the boundaries that we create and the borders that we make cannot be greater than the love we claim to hold on to.
Yes. And one of the things you just talked about, or you hinted or alluded to, you said something about toxicity within the establishment. And we found a quote by Keith Boykin, who is a journalist, author, and political commentator, that said, the church might be the most homophobic and most homotolerant of any institution in the Black community. And so us as three Black queer men, we wanted to ask you, do you think this statement is true? Or do you think it's...
I think...
Go ahead.
I think in as much, if I understand what Boykin is saying, that the church has been one of the most homophobic places, but at the same time, in some spaces, it has been one of the most tolerant places. And here's what I liken it to. You know, I think that the church has a tendency to follow the lead of culture on some issues. What becomes culturally acceptable or culturally relevant, the church has a tendency to follow, to be, late adapters, not the early innovators. And I think that when it comes to issues around LGBTQ community, we have often followed one, not only cultural lead, but also misconstrued understandings of scriptures that reinforce prejudice and bias. And at the same time, we also have created a hierarchy of what when I say we, I mean the church, of what the church views as sin. And for some reason, we have viewed people who are queer to be on the highest of the highest sin factor. That to me is gross hypocrisy, because it doesn't necessarily state that in scripture. Even many of the scriptures that many preachers, and I say preachers because many preachers who use these scriptures are not theologians. These are not biblical scholars. These are people who have been handed down understandings of scriptures that have been given to them, right or wrong, and they've been running with that. But I speak on a different level. I'm not someone who's just trying to read a scripture and say, well, here's what I think it means. I consider myself a theologian and a biblical scholar, which means my engagement with scripture is more than just Sunday school and surface level. It's a little bit deeper. It goes into the language. It goes into the historical and cultural and social context in which the scripture was written. So to get a better understanding, not of what I want it to mean, but what was the writer trying to say when the writer wrote these passages? Because there's a big difference between the intention of the writer and the interpretation of the reader. Unfortunately, in many of our churches, the interpretation of the reader reigns supreme over the intention of the writer. And so this is why, for me, I think we have often found ourselves, the church, on the wrong side of this issue. Right. And we have weaponized our faith to now demean, belittle, castigate, ostracize, dehumanize individuals. Now, the Christian church has done that. But it's hard to do that if you follow the teachings of the carpenter. And that's the distinction, right? Yeah. For people who have been wounded by society, hurt by culture, found a space of acceptance and relevancy and love in the presence of the carpenter. That is who we are called to follow. Not the kind of Constantinian Christianity and colonized Christianity that has been used to reinforce oppressive structures, but the early movement of the carpenter that was designed to liberate those who have been wounded and damaged. That's where I stand. And that's where, for me, theologically, many of the churches forget. We love to use the name of Jesus, but we don't follow the teachings of Jesus.
See, and I love everything that you're saying right now, because honestly, personally speaking, it's been a long time since I've talked to a pastor or stepped foot in the church. And this is part of why we wanted to have you come on, because we have a platform that's catered to and geared to a certain community that we know that there are a lot of others that are like us that haven't spoken to a pastor, haven't been to church, haven't talked about religion, and haven't heard someone like you say exactly what you said in the way that you said it, because it will now open minds and hearts. Damon, you have a point?
Yeah, and I think for someone from my background who kind of grew up in the church and not as frequent of a churchgoer now, but knowing that people have manipulated the Bible, the teachings of Christ, and the teachings of Christ who never said anything about homosexuality, who point to scriptures in the Old Testament that have been poorly translated as their stand to like dehumanize people. And I think that's the thing when he talks about being a theologian and studying things. It's not just reading a sentence and pointing to it and saying, hey, it says that. Well, what was the intention? How was that translated over hundreds of years in different languages? And how did the influences of what was going on culturally affect how people wanted to translate and communicate things? So I think that's a very powerful thing. Being someone who has come from that tradition and being a part of choir, all these things growing up. So wanted to add that.
Yeah.
Well, I'll add this. You know, I'm a movie buff, right? So one of my favorite movies is The Matrix, right? All time. I always look at The Matrix as like a postmodern interpretation of the New Testament. If you hear me say that, you watch it, you'll see it now, right? So the thing is, there's a scene when Neo goes through his kind of transformation, his awakening, his metamorphosis, and Neo being the main character. And he goes through almost a baptism. He goes down into this water. He's pulled out of the water, and now he's new. And he tells Morpheus, who is played by Lawrence Fishburne, he says, "My eyes hurt." And he says, "That's because you've never used them." See, when we approach Scripture, we often look at Scripture through the eyes of others' interpretation. So we often can see a text in front of us, read it. We're not reading it to listen. We're reading it, imposing upon it what we've been told. For example, a scripture that has been used to justify what I would call abuse and punitive abuse of people and members who are queer is the Sodom and Gomorrah text, right? And so there's an interpretation of that text that says that God destroyed the city because of homosexuality, because of rape, which is actually the issue. But here's what people forget. If you read the whole story, where there's a conversation between God and Abraham before the city is destroyed, it's right there in the story. God tells Abraham, "I'm going to destroy the city." Abraham begins to negotiate with God as to if he can stop and possibly save the city, because he's concerned about his nephew and his nephew's wife. So he's trying to negotiate with God, right? And he starts really negotiating God down. He does a great job, but here's the thing. When God tells Abraham he's going to destroy the city, it is before even the very act that people say is the reason why God destroyed. In other words, if you read the story, God never told Abraham why he was going to destroy the city. Not one time in the entire story. Now, take what you just heard me say and then maybe think about what you've been told over the years, right? So that means you actually can, and I remember this about a few years ago, I was teaching a class at the church, and a woman said to me that, I just can't tolerate, homosexuality. And it was interesting because the woman at the time is an amazing HIV/AIDS activist who's had full-blown AIDS since 1998. Okay. And I told her, I said, it's amazing given the stereotypes connected historically to that condition that you would be this, just the stereotypes, not the truth of the facts, the stereotypes. And I said, well, let's go to the scripture itself. Let's read it. Right. I said, because I'm going to show you that what you think is the reason why God destroyed the city is not what it said. And I had her read it. When she read it, she sat there and started crying. And she said, my God, she said, all these years, I thought that God did this for this reason. She said, I've been wrong. And I said, and how did you find out you were wrong? You actually read it for yourself.
Wow. That's powerful.
And then you discovered something different.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
And so, Pastor Mike, keeping in line with, you kind of talked about or touched on stereotypes. And with the Black church, the Black church is an organization and an institution that has been so pivotal in history throughout the civil rights movement. But at the same time, it's lagged in its support of queer people and women. And you, as a leader, have embraced both queer people and women. To our understanding, you have an associate pastor who identifies as queer. And so was there any sort of response or pushback or, anything of that nature from the congregation as it pertains to your affirming of queer members and women in leadership.
No, we had a former pastor who identified as queer. She's gone on to do some other things. And here's the thing: I've actually ordained queer clergy. I've ordained queer deacons. By the time I did these things, and we hired a pastor who identified as a queer woman, there was no pushback in the church because I had been teaching for years what I thought was true to Scripture and true to what Jesus would have wanted us to do. And initially, I think many years ago, there were some people who had issues with women in leadership or my views with regard to LGBTQ community. But, you teach. What you find out is that many of our people operate out of ignorance, and they allow ignorance to become fact.
Right.
And when you begin to dispel the ignorance and then replace it with real fact and real, in this case, real study, you help people come along. Now, everybody may not come along, but as I tell people, there are 500 churches in Harlem. And if you don't like what's happening here, there's 499 you can find somewhere to go. I do not feel any kind of way when someone says I'm leaving because of the church's position on X, Y, Z. Because some pastors feel compelled. I can't take when people leave. Well, no, because if you say that God told you to leave, who am I to get in the way between your relationship with you? So if that's the case, so be it. But we didn't have an issue because we've always been allies. Now, the church has been allies. My own journey, I can tell you about that, how that emerged if you want. But we've been allies. And so we've always done activities during Pride Month. We've done things on Pride Sunday. And when we did it, people were shocked, right? And other churches, of course, had commentary and things to say.
Of course.
But, I love it because, a lot of churches, the pastors won't say it in my face, of course. They'll say it around me. Because part of it is that they're not going to get into a debate with me about this. Because right. I tell people, and this is me being real honest, I keep it 100, man. If I don't mind being challenged, but no, when I show up to the challenge, my guns are fully loaded. Don't come shooting the cats. So I'm a really teach and enlighten and inform. But we got no pushback from the church. I will give you a story, a great story. A brother, his name was Aquarius, who was ordained, openly gay brother, who I ordained into ministry. And I ordained him primarily. He had been a minister there for some years. He had come there from Georgia, but he was getting ready to take a job in Philadelphia. I knew it would be challenging for him because of many of the churches are so traditional and conservative for him to find the space. So I said, brother, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ordain you so that no one can ever take away your ordination.
Yeah.
So no matter where you go, you'll still be a reverend, so-and-so. So it was in his ordination ceremony, which we do is public. It's really a public conversation. I'm asking, the other pastors are asking different theological questions. And the brother is also HIV positive, right? And he said something that had us in tears. He said, and it was deep. He said he had been infected with the virus by a pastor.
Whoa.
Right? He dropped that bomb. And I never heard that story until he said it. And he said for years he was in denial that he was HIV positive.
Wow.
He refused to take the medication because he just believed, one, that he was bad, that it was, the typical thing. You internalize the negativity, you internalize the negative narrative, and then you go into utter denial. Right. And he said one day taking communion at church, he realized he was getting sick. The doctor said, you got to take this medication. And he said he was able to take the medication because for him, the medication became Eucharist or communion. It became his wine and his bread to give him life. That's how he had to look at it. Man, when I tell you, when he said this, there was not a dry eye in the church. I mean, we were done. I'm sitting there trying to hold back the but it was a powerful moment, powerful on many levels. One, to be in a Black Baptist church and to see the ordination of an openly gay Black man who was willing to tell his story publicly about how he was infected by a pastor who was, of course, on the down low, how he had been in denial, how he had battled depression, suicidal ideation, all of that because he didn't find a place of rest in church. Second narrative, another member of the FCBC, on last Pride, 2 Sundays, 2 years ago on Pride Sunday, I wore a Pride shirt, our Pride shirt, preaching. Brother came to me weeping, man. And he said, Pastor, he said, when I was a young boy, He said, my pastor wore that kind of shirt and preached the message you did today. He said it would change my whole life. It would have saved me a lot of pain that I went through, because I would have felt valued and validated.
Yes.
Right? That to me is the work of the church, who follows the teachings of the carpenter.
Right.
Not to beat and belittle, but to empower and let people know that they always have a place in God's presence.
You know, Pastor Mike, this is all rooted in trauma right now. Like what you're talking about is there's a lot of trauma that people are facing and are under, and there are a lot of our listeners who have decided like to never step foot in a church again due to these traumatic experiences. And you have done such an amazing job of increasing interest and recapturing interest in the youth and youth queer audience in a way that people are probably just not used to or haven't seen. It's unconventional, and you're doing it. And so we, like, along the lines of what you're kind of saying right now, we just want to hear from you a message of what you would say to those individuals who've decided not to step foot back in the church because of traumatic experiences they've had in the past.
Okay, very cool. Very briefly, I'll give you 3 quick pieces, and one, I don't know if you're probably familiar with the writer, brother Michael Artino.
He went to Howard University like we did, so we are very familiar with him.
Yeah. So I did a podcast with him, and when I went to the studio with him, he's from Texas, and he shared his experience, how he was done with church. His book, Why I Can't Date Jesus.
Yeah.
There's a chapter in the book where he actually talks about 1 Corinthians. Because when I went to do the interview, he said for years people have been telling him he needed to come to 1 Corinthians. He's like, nah, I'm not doing church. And he said when he walked in after years of being told he should come there, he said he started looking around. He said, he saw people. He said, same gender loving couples. And he said, wait a minute. He said, this is different. And he said that being in that space gave him a renewed sense of hope in many ways, that he was like, I'm not saying I'm gonna go to church every Sunday. He said, but at least I know that this place exists, right? Now, to my brothers and sisters, my queer brothers and sisters who are trying to figure out, who say they're done with church, let me put this in people. Let me say it one way. I'm in New York City. Restaurants abound in New York City. I have gone to some horrible restaurants in New York City. My horrific experiences with horrible food and horrible service did not make me swear off restaurants. I found a restaurant that I liked. So what I challenge people is, don't let the trauma, right, become definitive for how you see the possibilities, right? Wow. There are spaces and there are places, but don't let the trauma shape your possibility. That I can speak for FCBC. There are places, and there is a place where the inherent dignity of your humanity is affirmed, where the labels that we carry are abandoned at the doors of the sanctuary, that we enter that place as children of God, that we affirm that, and we believe that. And I don't let any other potential labels that people heap on other persons define how I view them. I'll give you the best story, and I'll close on this story. I had a gentleman. We had we call it men's talk conversation. I had a men's talk conversation. And afterwards, during the conversation, we had talked about issues around queer members of the community. Because, of course, you still have some men who, felt some kind of way, and that's fine. But afterwards, this brother comes to me in tears. Another situation. He said, Pastor, he said, when I came to FCBC, he said I was completely anti-gay. He said, I'm going to tell you why. He said, back in the days in New York, I don't know if you all are from New York, but the city itself, but back in the days in many places, when you had trouble in school, and he's older, he's about 60, in his 60s, he said they sometimes would take children and commit them to these institutions, psychological hospitals, for evaluation. He was getting in trouble a lot, and he got committed into one of these schools for a couple of months, these hospitals/schools. He said, and one of the doctors molested him, right? He said at that moment, it so damaged him that he was completely against anybody who was gay. Why? Because anyone who was gay, all he saw was the face of his abuser. Okay? Now, here's where it got intense. His daughter came out to him as being queer, and they stopped the relationship. He said he couldn't engage his daughter because she was gay. This is before right when he started coming to FCBC. Over the years, he started serving FCBC, volunteering as one of the security and ushers, and he would be in these teachings. He would hear me teach. He comes to me on this particular day after the conversation. He said, my daughter has transitioned to a man, right? Uh-huh. He said, but Pastor, I want to thank you. He said, and he's saying this to me now, he's crying when he says it. He said, I want to thank you for what you've taught me and the man I've become. He said, because of this church and because of you, he said, my son and I have a relationship that my daughter and I never had.
Ooh. Wow. Like
that thing broke me down.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that.
I mean, it's powerful. Like, and how that came full circle. But Jordan, you had a comment?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about Michael's experience, Pastor Mike, I actually have a very similar experience. I haven't gone to church in years, it seemed. Like, I went to a Catholic high school, but that's about the extent of church involvement that I had since I graduated. But the very first time that I came back to church was at FCBC, and ironically enough, it was because I came with my boyfriend at the time, and I don't really exactly remember all the words that were said. It was a couple of years ago, but I do remember feeling motivated. I remember the sermon being about looking inward, and I think the problem that I had with religion in the past is that I felt like it was almost so literal that I would hear scriptures and it was almost told to me that I needed to like mimic what was happening, or I needed to like take the characters in the Bible or the people in the Bible and basically mirror that behavior. But I didn't get that feeling when I was at FCBC. So I want to just thank you for all the work that you're doing and all the progress that you're making. I'm someone who has a history of, in the family being dehumanized and not really supported, and like having that be justified by the Bible. So actually having those experiences in your church were really impactful to me. And I'm just happy that, you're being a catalyst for that type of change, because I do think that there's a lot of value in, the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah. And speaking of being a catalyst for that type of change, Jordan, that's exactly what I wanted to ask Pastor Mike next before we let him go, is that you've kind of made a model around inclusivity, Pastor Mike, at 1 Corinthians. And we're just curious to know, what kind of work might you be doing to help other churches and congregations kind of get on board and lead in that way, the way that you're leading, the way that you've been open, the way that you're interpreting. Can you just, shed a little light on the type of work you're doing there?
Yeah, I would say in terms of churches, I will tell you, churches are very interesting. There are many churches in our community who view what I do as, an abomination, or I'm a heretic, and publicly. Now, behind, some will come privately and say things like they wish they could be as courageous. They wish they could do that. Or say these things. And truth be told, a lot of them would be concerned that the churches would fire them, put them out the church. And I understand that. I don't condemn those persons. But I know that there are certain institutional barriers that prevent certain leaders from leading in a particular way. So what I do is I really am intentional about mentoring the next generation of clergy. I have several mentees in their 20s and 30s that I really teach and pour into, who are seeking to reimagine church the way we do it, who are affirming and inclusive, as you said, not just of queer people, but women in general. Our church leadership is majority women. The pastors are majority women. That is unheard of in the Black Baptist Church. We have 80% of the deacons are female, 80% of the trustees are female. And right now, before my wife, she used to be on staff before she went to teach, be president of seminary. For a long time, there were 4 female pastors and myself until my son came on staff. And now we have 3 and 2. So women have always led. And one day someone asked me, why do women lead so much in the church? I said, well, I learned when I was in school taking a class at Spelman College, and a religion course. It was called Women in the Bible. My professor at the time, who's still a friend and mentor, she said the majority of black churches are women, 75% women. And yet in many of our churches, women are not allowed to preach. They're not allowed to lead, but they sure support and undergird the church. They supply the resource for the church. They fund the church. They keep the church going, but they can't lead or preach. She said that's called taxation without representation. So and I said, I told the other men, I said, yeah, the demographics of leadership will change when the makeup of the church changes. So right now we have a church that's majority women, 75% women for the most part, maybe 70 or 65 now. I said, and the leadership will reflect the demographic of the church. This is not a patriarchy where men run it. This is an institution where we honor those people who are here. So what I try to do is lead that way. When I teach around the country or preach around the country, or people bring me in to do workshops or leadership workshops, I talk about what it means to be the church of the future, being inclusive, being affirming, but more than anything, taking the teachings of Jesus seriously. Because if you take the teachings of Jesus seriously, it's hard to do some of the things we do and say. But as you know, and may know, many of our institutions are more committed to maintaining the sanctity of the institution than honoring the teachings of the carpenter. So what I do from that pulpit, what I do no matter where I go, I'm intentional. I heard one of you talk about Christ earlier. Think about that. There was a book years ago called White Woman's Christ, Black Woman's Jesus, where Christ becomes more of a term for Jesus that speaks about power and those in control. Whereas our grandmothers didn't necessarily say Christ. They said there's not a friend like the lowly Jesus, right? Because Jesus was a brother in the struggle view. So there's a difference in even how we view Jesus. Christ is a title. Jesus is the name. And we're so fixated on maintaining the title that we've forgotten the teachings of the name. So that's what I try to do and replicate that no matter where I go. But I have several pastors around the country who call me regularly and ask how to broach this, how to do this, how to become a more inclusive community, how to lead a congregation becoming more accepting and affirming of queer members and things like that. So I've never stopped doing that.
That is awesome. And Damon, you have a point.
No, it was just funny because I was sitting here quiet for a bit because I kind of lost myself for a moment. But purely because like I spent decades growing up in the church. Like my grandfather was a pastor. My father was the head of the deacons board and like church, like in the church. And I've never in my entire life heard someone from the church speak the way you spoke, tell the stories you did, speak about topics around trans people, HIV, queer people. And it, for me, like even being like the person here that grew up in the church, like I was today years old when I had the experience of someone speaking about my existence and my identity in that way. And it just, I don't know what I expected from this conversation, but it wasn't that. It wasn't that. But thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean,
but can I be transparent though? Sure. I can't leave without being honest. In this, I mean, in this regard, I come from a West Indian family, and in the Caribbean, you know, and you may know, I mean, it's very homophobic. And that's the environment I grew up in. And I was very homophobic as a teenager coming up in the community I grew up in. Was just a rough space. And I wasn't punitive about it. You know, I went to Morehouse and I encountered brothers who were queer, but I just didn't engage them, you know, kind of stayed away. What happened was when I was in grad school, in divinity school, preparing for ministry, right? I worked 2 part-time jobs to show how long ago this was. One part-time job was I Blockbuster Video. And
the original Netflix.
And this was right. This was in 1993, and my other job was working at the front desk at a hotel, all while I'm in full-time grad school. Well, I would always work from 3 to 11. That was my shift at the hotel, and it was not a lot of people checking in at times, so I would do a lot of my reading. But there were 4 of us who worked that shift. Myself, another African American sister, a white woman, and a white man. His name was Sean, and he was gay. And just my attitude back then. And every time I saw myself having to work with Sean, right? I hated having to work with Sean. This is just in my mind, just where I grew up. Very homophobic, very anti-gay. This is me at 21, 22. And I also didn't like Sean because I thought Sean was just too flamboyant, right? This is me now. And I'm looking at him, and we would get in these arguments. I would go off for him, like, just stay on that side of the desk, bro. Don't come near me. That's how I was.
Yep.
And my wife would often come pick me up. You know, we're young. We got a child already. We had our child in college. And she would come inside to pick me up because we would walk back out a different way and go through the kitchen. And we were struggling, man. We were broke. And the folks in the kitchen would always give us food. So she would come in. We would walk to the back with my son, and we would get food to take home. So one day he made a comment about a gentleman who came in, and I lost it, man. You know, how he looked, whatever, and I just went off. And Sean looked at me and said, and this is me, I'm 22 at the time. He said, let me ask you a question. He said, why do you hate me so much? And I said, because you're gay. And I don't like that. And I said some other things too that I won't repeat now. Right? And he said to me, he said, you know what, Mike? He said, when your wife comes here at night to pick you up, he said, and I see her coming here with your son, he said, there's never been a time when I've ever looked at you all and thought about what y'all did in bed. He said, why is that all you can see when you see me?
Wow.
He hit me with that. And then I think I cursed him out some more. I get home that night, bro, I broke down crying because my hypocrisy slapped me in the face. How am I in divinity school wanting to lead people in church, talk about the love of Jesus, and act the way I did with his brother? I went back to him. I apologized when we worked together again for my behavior. And I remember I told my wife, I said, if I'm going to be who God has called me to be, I said, I have to really be who God has called me to be. And that began my journey. That began my journey of unlearning all that toxic baggage I carried as a child growing up in my environment and beginning to honor the dignity, not just of Sean's humanity, because the truth is, if I don't honor the humanity of another human being, I'm not honoring my own humanity.
Yes.
Right? My humanity is at stake. And that journey started at 21, and now I'll be 50. So, and so I'm grateful for Sean because he began the change in my life that made me, I think, the kind of pastor I am today.
Well, Pastor Mike, we want to thank you for being here with us today, sharing these stories. I speak on behalf of Damon, Jordan, and Surface Level, where we learned a lot. And so we're really appreciative of your time. And if there's anything that you want to leave us with, any final words, or if you want to talk about anything that's coming up with FCBC, now would be the time to do so before we let you go.
No, I'm just thankful for you all having me. I mean, if there are people who want to check out FCBC, it's fcbcnyc.org and FCBC NYC on all of our platforms. But I'm grateful for the work you're doing, and I'm grateful for the invitation to share with you all today, because this work that we do at FCBC is work I wish more people knew about. And I want people to know that even those who've been wounded and damaged and traumatized by church, don't let it be definitive. There are places that actually take God seriously and take love seriously, and we're just blessed to be one of those places. So thank you, brothers.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's all the time we have for this week. Let us know your questions and comments on Instagram at Surface Level Podcast or our official website, surfacelevelpodcast.com. You can watch our responses in our new video series, Surface Level Sound Off, on Instagram and YouTube. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe. And remember, stay curious.